I have been indicted, tried, and convicted of the murder of William Goebel. I was born in Campbell County and I am by profession a lawyer. At the time of the murder, I was living in Frankfort, Kentucky. I went to Cincinnati for smokeless cartridges with steel bullets. We wanted that kind as we understood that Goebel wore some armor of some sort. The bullets were to be used in a .38-35 Marlin rifle which I had borrowed. Before the cartridges had arrived, Dr. Johnson came to me and said that he would kill Goebel, but I said to wait until after January 25th, when the Mountain Army was expected to come to Frankfort, and we thought the contest would be settled in our favor. On the afternoon of the 25th, I went to the general reception room and I knocked at the door of the private office of the Secretary of State. I heard a noise of some kind and Dr. Johnson opened the door. When I went in, I saw that the corner window was raised and that there were two chairs which were so arranged that anyone could take aim across the back of the one chair, sit on the chair in the rear, and shoot out the window in the direction of the walk leading to the State House. Colton was in the reception room, and when they saw that I understood, W.H. Colton asked me to go up to the Senate chamber and see if Goebel was there. I went up and reported that he still was. I had several talks with Dr. Johnson about the gun. Late in the afternoon of January 25th, Dr. Johnson said to me that he certainly would have killed Goebel that morning, but he came out with the crowd, and Johnson also wanted to have a message of some kind from Taylor. So I went to see Taylor and I told him that Dr. Johnson was willing to do the killing, and I said all arrangements had been made to use the window in the private office of the Secretary of State. Taylor did not object but followed me out to the porch and said never to tell a mortal soul about what had taken place between us. I went back and I told Dr. Johnson what Taylor had said, but I never saw Dr. Johnson again after that conversation. There was another arrangement made for Hockersmith, the Negro, to do the killing, but the plans miscarried because John Powers gave me the wrong key and he couldn't get into the office. After that, he refused to do the work unless Taylor would sanction it, and when the matter was presented to Taylor, he said that he wasn't going to trust the Negro, Hockersmith, to do it. After these plans had failed, Taylor, in his private office, dictated a letter to me to James B. Howard of Manchester, Kentucky, telling him to come on Frankfort at once, as he was likely to lose his job at any time. Taylor told Howard to report to me, and what I said would be all right. On the morning of January 30th, Big Jim Howard came into my office and told me that who he was, and I told him what he was expected to do. We went together to the private office of Caleb Powers, and I showed Howard the Marlin rifle, which he examined and said was all right. Just then I saw Senator Goebel with Colonel Jack Chin coming into the State House yard, whereupon I pointed out Senator Goebel to Howard, and I immediately left the room. Howard was the only person left in the room, and he had the Marlin rifle in his hand. I went out the glass door which leads to the hall, and I closed it, and I stood with my hand on the knob until I heard the shot fired. Then I ran down the steps which leads to the basement and around the northeast corner of the executive building. I did not stop running until I gained the office of Taylor, whereupon I announced to him that Goebel had been shot. Over the next few years, 16 people were indicted in the assassination of Governor Goebel, including Governor Taylor. 3 accepted immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony, while only 5 eventually went to trial. Of the 5, 2, Garrett Ripley and Barry Howard, were acquitted. 3 people were convicted: Caleb Powers, the Secretary of State under Governor Taylor; Henry Yautsey, a stenographer; and Big Jim Howard, a veteran of the Hatfield-McCoy feud several years earlier. At least 5 men testified that Big Jim Howard bragged about killing Goebel. Caleb Powers, the Republican Secretary of State, served 8.5 years in jail. William Sylvester Goebel and Caleb Powers and Jim Howard were pardoned by Governor Wilson, but not Yautsey. Caleb Powers ended up having a terrific life. He was elected to U.S. Congress and would brag that he spent more time as a congressman than what he did in jail. Tallow Dick Combs was a black man who was indicted for Goebel's murder, was suspiciously found dead on the train tracks during one of Caleb Powers' 3 trials. After William Justice Goebel was shot, that same day a black man in Frankfort also was killed. Craig Ireland and Ike Williams collided into each other, running to get to the State House, and Ike Williams punched Craig Ireland, and the European-American Craig Ireland, in response to the punch, pulled out his pistol and he murdered the African-American Ike Williams down like a dog. 3 pro-Goebel Democrats also were murdered in Breathitt County. Once the German William Justice Goebel was slain in 1900, reform would never come to Kentucky, and Kentucky was destined to be poor, sick, and dumb, and violent forever. William Justice Goebel was the first New Dealer. Goebel was a principled, untouchable revolutionary in a world full of professional corruptionists. Goebel was murdered because of his crusade to rein in the power of the Goldman Sachs, the BPs, and the Massey Energies of the period, which were the railroad, the coal, and the banking barons. Goebel took on the L&N, who was owned by Milton Smith. And the chairman of the board was August Belmont, who was a big banker. And then you had the sycophant lobbyist, Basil W. Duke. Goebel took all 3 of these guys on in defense of the working common man. William Justice Goebel's legislative successes regulating the power of the corporations earned him their scorn, but it also earned the admiration of Kentucky's workers. William Justice Goebel was assassinated because he was an uncompromising, principled, untouchable who fought for the common people. The Kentucky Senate passed a resolution that stated, as the Christ's life was sacrificed to class hatred conspiring with imperial power, so was the life of William Goebel paid forfeit to a conspiracy of monopolistic power. In March of 1900, the McCord Bill, which called for the regulation of railroads, became law. Goebel was assassinated 6 weeks before the McCord Bill had passed. In 1900, Lakeland's official name was changed to Central Kentucky Asylum for the Insane. Later, it became known as Central State Hospital. The secluded rural setting was typical of such facilities in the late 19th century, as the environment was thought to be beneficial for recovery from mental illness. However, not all patients had mental disorders. Some suffered from brain damage, mental retardation, but others were simply poor or elderly, and they were put in the Central State Hospital. The early decades of the 1900s were marked by repeated allegations of abuse and malfeasance, and deaths went unreported and uninvestigated, and records were lost. It's unknown how many deceased patients are buried at the Central State Hospital grounds. In 1900, the largest coal mine in Kentucky was being controlled by a German superintendent who was born and educated in Germany, and he brought his mining engineering degree to the United States after the Civil War, and he settled in Kentucky in 1886. In May 1901, Theodore Gripshover overturned his wagon crossing Bank Lick Creek. Theodore Gripshover died of pneumonia as a result, and he left behind his wife Frances with 8 children from 12 years down to 6 years old. During the first few decades of the 20th century, Kate Gripshover attended Old Kentucky State Hospital, a loony bin for nut jobs. The Old Kentucky State Hospital is in Danville, Kentucky, below Lexington on Shakertown Road. This is about 5 miles from Danville. It's very close to the Mercer County line, and there are reports that people were being quarantined for disease, and then they would disappear from the world completely, and nobody was allowed to go to their funeral. There were also 2 burial sites with graves identified by names and 2 dates. There are 4,000 people buried in the Darnell Cemetery in Danville. This cemetery today is on North Point Training Center's, the state prison's property, which is also 5 miles north of Danville, Kentucky, off of Kentucky Highway 33 on Shakertown Road on North 3rd Street. September 6, 1901, President William McKinley is assassinated. In 1902, Johann Most went to jail for 2 months for publishing an editorial in which he argued that it was no crime to slay a tyrant. In 1904, Professor Hugo Munsterberg wrote the book The Americans to expose the inaccurate stereotypes that were held by both the Germans and the Americans. In 1905, German Albert Einstein published The Theory of Relativity, and he revolutionized science with the theory of relativity, also with E equals MC squared. In 1906, Mary Ann DeMosco came to America with her family, and at 9 years old, she was having to work as a nurse for the wealthy DeVoes in Covington. Mary Ann DeMosco would steal coats and bread with icing on it in order to bring back home to her siblings, something to bring back to her siblings. Later on, Mary Ann DeMosco, like the Lowell Mill girls, worked at a sewing factory in Cincinnati, while her mother stayed home and kept house. In 1908, Governor Augustus E. Wilson pardoned Howard and Powers, Big John Howard and Caleb Powers, as well as Governor William Sylvester Taylor and several other persons still under the indictment for the assassination of Goebel. Yahtzee, however, was not pardoned. In 1910, Professor Hugo Munsterberg wrote American Problems, where he points out that Americans have a general inability to concentrate their attention on any one thing for very long, among other criticisms of the white nativist Protestants. In 1911, John Hunt Morgan, the terrorizer of Sanford Town, had a statue of him erected at the Lexington Courthouse with financial support coming from rich families in the horse industry and also the Commonwealth of Kentucky's taxpayers. In 1916, a massive Anglo-Americanization campaign was launched. The resulting loyalty hysteria that accompanied the United States' entry into the World War I led to an accelerated end of organized German-American culture. Before the U.S. declared war on Germany in April 1917, many German Americans, especially those that had been born in Germany, openly supported the Germans in the war against Britain, France, and Russia. After the sinking of 7 U.S. merchant ships by submarines and the publication of the Zimmerman telegram, President Wilson called for war on Germany, which the U.S. Congress declared on April 6, 1917.
Called the Greyhound of the Seas, the Lusitania was the fastest passenger liner of her time. Yet in the end, she wasn't fast enough to outrun the German submarine which sank her during World War I. When it set out for Liverpool, England, from New York on May 1st, 1915, the Lusitania was supposed to be carrying only civilians. The Germans suspected that the Lusitania contained tons of ammunition bound for British guns. Before it left, Germany posted an ad in New York papers warning passengers that the Lusitania would travel through waters patrolled by German submarines. The captain of the Lusitania assured passengers the ship was in no danger. As the Lusitania neared Ireland, the captain received warnings that U-boats were in the area and that he should take evasive action. Instead, the captain slowed down. The German submarine U-20 tracked the Lusitania and at 2:10 in the afternoon fired a single torpedo penetrating the hull just below the waterline. 15 seconds later, a massive second explosion split the boat apart. In just 18 minutes, the great ship went down. Nearly 2,000 people hit the freezing water. In the end, over 1,100 died, among them 128 Americans. The outrage was immediate. Anti-German sentiment exploded across America. The incensed public put pressure on President Woodrow Wilson to warn Germany to stop attacking passenger ships. The Germans insisted the Lusitania was also carrying ammunition destined to be fired at German soldiers. But decades later, secret British documents confirmed the Lusitania was carrying ammunition. Regardless, the damage was done, and American public opinion turned against Germany. On April 6, 1917, the United States Congress officially declared war on Germany and entered the First World War.
Also, ass, like, the bottom, your bottom, whatever you call it, not the donkey or whatever you call it, is ash. And also, once again, you have the low tone sh at the end of it, and you don't say ash, you say ash, and that is ass.
For the time being.
Hier ist der Erdbeerausweis, den Sie mal bei sich haben müssen.
This is their hereditary passport, with space for 12 future children. A subtle hint. Germany needs soldiers.
Fürs deutsche Vaterland. Ich überreiche Ihnen ein wertvolles Geschenk von unserem Führer.
As a reward, they get a copy of Germany's bestseller,